Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had a chance to stretch your legs and take a little comfort break. I'm going to introduce you to David now, who's going to get a case study. One of the things we talked about at the beginning of the session was the importance of sharing and learning and collaborating. And I think this session is going to be a perfect example of that. So, David, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. So as John said, my name is David Leffler. I'm the Discovery and Access Librarian at Liberty University. The session today will be about 15 to 20 minutes, and I'll be talking about Liberty University's transition from EZproxy to OpenAthens. So I'll start by giving a brief introduction, some context to our transition, and then I'll talk a little bit about tips for transitioning different electronic environments, and then general troubleshooting tips that we've found over time, and then also some tips for communicating with stakeholders that I think can help other institutions be effective in their communications. So I work at Jerry Falwell Library, and for some context, we have well over 400 subscriptions. We have an FTE that is well above 100,000 students. So fairly large university. I've been here for over a year, and the scope and size of Liberty is significantly larger than what I was used to. So we've had a fair bit of experience troubleshooting different subscriptions and transitioning them from EZproxy to OpenAthens. Just want to mention briefly some of our perceived benefits of OpenAthens are better security, so particularly federated access, requiring less maintenance, so proxy stanza updates, thing of the past, it's wonderful. And then also better usage reporting capabilities. We're thrilled about that, and especially some of that granular information that we get from federated access. So here is a little bit of a roadmap, if you will, of our implementation milestones. So I sent my first email in December 15th of 2021, asking, I believe it was ProQuest, to switch over to OpenAthens and add our federated details. We went from that to December 27th, which is when we switched over our integrated library system and our learning management system to OpenAthens. So as of today, we have officially switched over, and we're working on sorting out some of the smaller details at this point. So these are the specific electronic environments that we switched to OpenAthens. We have Canvas, Alma, Concourse, and then of course we have our A to Z databases and our libguides. So we'll be talking about these different electronic environments, but these are the specific resources that we use at Liberty University. Okay. So specifically, I'll be talking about our A to Z page, learning management system, and integrated library system. So for our A to Z page, for a little bit of context, for those who are unfamiliar, A to Z pages generally store or house, they make accessible and discoverable different subscriptions and databases that their users can access. Some of the challenges that we experienced when onboarding OpenAthens for our A to Z page were accurate testing. So specifically for our off-campus users, liaising with vendors, and then switching permalinks over from EZproxy to OpenAthens. The way that we addressed these issues was by using a virtual machine. So we have a lot of off-campus users, and one of the things we wanted to make sure that we were doing is getting an authentic off-campus experience. So we were able to bypass our network proxy by using a virtual machine. And then of course, contacting vendors directly to add our IP address and federated details to establish access. And then again, emailing vendors to change the permalink prefix from EZproxy to OpenAthens. So for our learning management system, we use it for content delivery and course management. And some of the challenges that we experienced were high volume of links. So If these links are in courses, students are accessing them directly. That is the primary way in which a student is receiving access from the library, and there were well over 10,000 links that we switched over. Another problem was originally broken links, and then also just the logistical problem of pulling links in our learning management system to identify what needed to be changed over. So how to address these issues? So this is just what we did to resolve the problem. So we had somebody in our IT department who's much more intelligent than I am write a script to basically do a giant find and replace of our old EZproxy links and replace them with OpenAthens links. In the instance where there were originally broken links in our learning management system, those required us to reach out to the course creator directly and basically say, hey, this link is in your class, it's broken, we don't know what it's going to. Can you please provide some context there so we can switch it out? And then for pulling links from your learning management system, I find that it's very helpful to work with IT, somebody who has scripting knowledge or is able to pull that information. As a librarian, that's not an area of expertise on my end. So working with IT was very helpful. And this is just kind of a conceptual recommendation that I have. When we were prescribing new links to go in our learning management system, I found that it was very helpful to keep derivative files. So basically, that's just a fancy way of saying keep the original file of all of your links in your learning management system. And then once you make a change to it, keep an extra save file. If it's a CSV file, keep an extra copy of that. So that way you can document over time, okay, we've made these changes to our links in our learning management system. It's very helpful if you find along the way that, hypothetically, you've made a change to Taylor and Francis links and that was a problem, needs to be changed in some sort of way, you can change that if you keep records. So our integrated library system, we use this for basically making information discoverable through our discovery layer. Other institutions use it for, acquisitions, cataloging, circulation, serials. We of course use it for those purposes as well. So some of the challenges for onboarding OpenAthens in an integrated library system. One is embedded links. So in our context, Alma needed to have the OpenAthens prefix at the beginning, just the way that it was structured and that it worked. Documenting your collections. So if you use Alma, using Alma Analytics can be extremely helpful for documenting your electronic collections. And then also making sure that people have the correct operator roles before you make the transition to OpenAthens can be really helpful. So we had December 27th as our official transition day. And before we did that, we knew who's going to be flipping switches, do they have the right permissions? And that was well worth its weight in gold. So how to address some of these issues? We removed the embedded proxies in our electronic collections. We exported our electronic collections using Alma Analytics, but also we had some of our cataloging staff that kept those records already. And then reaching out to your systems librarian or whoever has access to permissions for your integrated library system, sending an email, just checking who needs to have what can be very helpful. Tips for general troubleshooting. So this is kind of a busy page, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. There's a lot of tools that you have access to with OpenAthens that you can use to help troubleshoot an issue. Generally speaking, if you are trying to troubleshoot some kind of an access problem, it's usually unexpected. So it's nice that with OpenAthens, you have a variety of tools at your disposal. The OpenAthens Administrator Console, what I personally use it for is checking link formats, and then also checking deep linking functionality, basically just making sure that is this subscription supposed to work at the article level? If I send a link to a faculty member to an article, is it going to work and should it work? That's what I personally use it for. So it can be really helpful for assessing new databases as well to see if it's going to work sending beyond the initial portal page. HAR files. So this takes a little bit of time to get used to, but if you're able to download a HAR file, let's say you've encountered some sort of a 404 error, you can pull up developer tools and then basically document exactly what happened and then provide that to developers and say, this is exactly what we experienced. Can you please help us with this? So I find it's also helpful for providing evidence that something did happen. Sometimes there can be a little bit of back and forth determining, is there a problem? We can't reproduce the issue. We can. So HAR files can be very helpful in that context. And then I mentioned earlier, we use a virtual machine. Basically, we're using that to bypass our network proxy. So if your institution has, I like to think of it as a big umbrella that goes over your campus that provides access, you want to bypass that for your off-campus users. And so another benefit of using a virtual machine is screen sharing. If you've ever tried to troubleshoot a problem over the phone and you're talking through, okay, this is what I'm seeing, this is what you're seeing, it's very helpful to have screen sharing. And then also providing evidence of issues for development teams. OpenAthens has a status page, so you can check system operations and check for scheduled upgrades. Really helpful. I've found that it's updated regularly. It's been very helpful for us. And then, of course, if you're past the implementation stage, OpenAthens has ticket submissions. I'll go on record saying that they are fantastic. I've received really quick responses, and they've been wonderful to work with. And then this is another benefit of using OpenAthens, is that you can provide test credentials to service providers with your own custom set of parameters. So let's say, in our context, we want them to only have test credentials for a single user, and I want to be able to cut them off in 2 weeks. And then I want to be able to delete the account. You can do that. So this has been tremendously helpful for providing service providers, basically trying to empower whatever developers on the other end of the technical issue with tools that are going to be helpful for troubleshooting. And I found that this is tremendously helpful. And then, of course, there's just the traditional emailing a service provider, hey, we're having this problem. Can you please help us? So tips for communicating with stakeholders. I have basically 3 recommendations. Keep it simple, clarify what needs to be changed, and create a guide. So for keeping it simple, I found that generally speaking, it's best to avoid talking about federations and proxies. Obviously, it depends on your context, but trying to, reduce the amount of, okay, I don't understand this, and communicate it in a way that makes sense for stakeholders, I find is helpful. Can this resource be added? Generally speaking, yes, that is what a lot of stakeholders want to hear. Can we add this database? Do we think that this can be added? I've never come across anything that is just a hard no. So generally speaking, it's a yes. Clarifying what needs to be changed. So for us in transitioning from EZproxy to OpenAthens, this was libguides for librarians. So the links that were actually stored in SpringShare needed to be changed. And then for faculty, it was new links, anything new in a course that was after our script change. And then also links in Word documents, PDFs, future links in LMS, or bookmarked URLs. So we used EZproxy beforehand, and generally speaking, you can do a manual remove, or you can look up the article in the database and then provide an OpenAthens link. So multiple ways for faculty members to do that. And here's just a quick example of our EZproxy prefix getting removed. So in most cases, it's fairly straightforward. And then create a guide. So for librarians, this is fairly straightforward in the sense that usually we're familiar with creating libguides. I created my own OpenAthens libguide to help faculty understand how to best link to articles within subscriptions. And then for administrators, if they have access to like an FAQ page, that may also be helpful. So here's just a really quick picture of our libguide. It has videos on how to link per database. It can be very time consuming to create videos, but I find that it's very helpful. And then we also have an FAQ. The LibGuide has received decent usage. So I think if you create some kind of a guide for your users, it's going to be kind of a smaller use case because not everyone's creating links that will work off campus. But for those that need it, it's very helpful. And then I wanted to mention the OpenAthens link generator. I found that communicating with other people, it's important to mention that it doesn't strip EZproxy from the URL, but it will create links that works off campus. And then I also try to articulate there are some vendors where you really do want to use the permalink that they've created that will work with OpenAthens that's specifically designed for OpenAthens. And so that's ProQuest, eBook Central, EBSCO, Ovid, JSTOR, and Gale. And that is my presentation. So my hope is that you've received something practical that will help you with your onboarding process. But with that, if we have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Thank you so much, David. We do have questions.
Great.
One of the questions that's come through is, are there any challenges to setting up test credentials for vendors or other non-institutional users?
So the initial challenge is, for our purposes, I created just like a quick copy and paste guide for vendors so they can see exactly, I've created a test account for you. I've written your, I've put in your email address and I've designated your password. So there's the initial account creation, and then also having, I think, screenshots of this is what you're expecting to encounter. So one challenge is there was one vendor in particular, there was some back and forth. They were confused that they weren't seeing our institution's login because they were encountering the OpenAthens login. So being upfront with that by saying, I'm providing test credentials through OpenAthens and you should expect to see an OpenAthens login page, I think can kind of help reduce some of that friction.
That's great. Another question is that how you're measuring the success of the migration, or is it too early to tell? And have you got any expectations about what those measures might be over the coming months?
It's a great question. Well, you know, the migration in a way is somewhat anticlimactic because there's quite a bit of work that happens on the front end to change things over, and we switched it over and we didn't receive a bunch of complaints. So it sounds a bit anticlimactic, but radio silence is, in my view, the mark of a successful transition, and that was our experience. And then, of course, after that, tracking down lingering EZproxy links and systematically changing them over. That's how I'm measuring success.
So I have a question. Thank you for that. I have a question. It's if you look out into the future, can you think of anything that OpenAthens could do that would make your life easier? Are there any improvements or feature enhancements?
I think I heard somewhere, and I don't want to make public something that's private, but having some sort of functionality that will help reach out to vendors. There's, you know, you have your ProQuests and EBSCOs that are absolutely in the know. They're very familiar. If you mention OpenAthens, they know federated access. But for us, we have over 400 subscriptions. So some of those are very small. And so some of the very small vendors, they hear OpenAthens and they go, oh, no, we don't do that. And, you know, some sort of functionality to help work with small vendors, perhaps. So they don't get scared hearing OpenAthens. It was never ultimately a problem, though.
Well, that's useful to hear. I mean, that relationship between the library and the vendor is actually very much in our focus. But again, it's interesting. It's not just about the technology; it's about the relationships and the people as well, which goes back to some of the things that we were talking about earlier. That knowledge of how to use the technology is as important as the technology itself. There's been lots of questions about links and syntax and scripting. Do you ever get the sense that we're just sort of playing at the edges of a significant problem around sort of e-resource access? I mean, do you think, can you see do you think there's an appetite for sort of a bigger platform or system change to solve the problems? That's
a really good question. So when it comes to the different syntaxes, at least practically, what I found was most helpful. So EBSCO, as an example, they have a very specific way they want users to link to their resources. I would love it if everybody had the exact same link syntax.
Yeah.
It would be really helpful. But I'll also admit, I don't know why there are some of those differences. So there perhaps are really good reasons. And we do have resources to help people with navigating some of those changes. But yeah, in a perfect world, they would all be the same.
And you talked about the kind of the very smart IT person who helped you with some of the challenges. So who were the key roles either within your institution, or the key roles or people either within your institution or outside of the institution who actually helped you deliver radio silence, if you like, when you transition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say our research support staff, we're blessed to have staff members that regularly test access, and they work from off campus. So before we started using virtual machines, basically having dedicated testing people to just verify, okay, yes, this vendor has successfully transitioned over, we're safe to swap that link out. Critical, I think, to having that radio silence. And then, of course, our IT team, having somebody who had the capacity to write a find and replace script for our learning management system, critical, extremely, extremely helpful. And then, of course, OpenAthens, working with your team. And, this has been a learning experience for myself, and having someone with an OpenAthens to kind of help teach, okay, this is what a link syntax is, because I didn't have any experience of this prior to last year. So having a good teacher, I think, has been really helpful.
We were chatting earlier, weren't we, about the importance of someone like Adam Snook.
Yes.
And I don't know if Adam's listening on the calls, but it's a shout out to Adam. I'm sure there's lots of people who've been involved with OpenAthens over the years will sort of recognize that, and how important it is to have those experts who are willing to go that extra mile to help.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Adam he's excellent. So yeah. Cheers to Adam.
Yeah, well done, Adam. So that's good. There's any more questions from anybody from the floor? No. So David, just this opportunity to say thank you for sharing that. Those slides will be made available, and I think it's that transition is important, but again, it's not about resting on your laurels, is it? We need to look to the future and how we continually to improve the service for end users, students, and for ourselves as well. So yeah, any final words?
It's been a pleasure working with OpenAthens, and thank you all for listening.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming to the session.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, David.